Picture it, a cold winter night in the heart of the Australian outback. The Stuart Highway stretches endlessly in both directions, nothing but dust, darkness, and the occasional glow of headlights cutting through the void. Rolling down that lonely strip of road is a bright orange combi van. Inside are two young British travelers, 28-year-old Peter Falconio and 27-year-old Joanne Lees. They're chasing the freedom of the open road, miles from anywhere, the kind of adventure people dream about. Then it happens. A white Toyota four-wheel drive with a green canopy pulls alongside, signaling for them to stop. The driver says he's seen sparks coming from their exhaust. It sounds like a warning, maybe even a favor. But as Peter steps to the back of the van to check, the night changes forever. There's a sudden movement. A gun appears. Joanne is forced into the back, her wrists bound tight with cable ties. She hears a loud bang, the kind that freezes your blood, and Peter is gone from sight. She's shoved, threatened, but somehow she manages to slip free. Heart pounding, she bolts into the bush, hides in the pitch black scrub for hours, listening for footsteps, every sound in the night magnified. It's only when she finally sees the lights of a passing truck that she dares to step out and wave it down. By the time police arrive, the combi is found abandoned, pushed several meters off the highway. There's blood on the ground. There's blood on Joanne's shirt. But there is no sign of Peter Falconio. Not then. Not ever. From the moment Joanne Lees stumbled out of the darkness that night, the Northern Territory Police treated the case as a homicide. No body, no confession, but the scene screamed of violence. Investigators pieced together the timeline from her account. They believed the man in the white Toyota had deliberately targeted the couple, using the sparks from your exhaust story as bait. Once Peter stepped out, the attacker produced a firearm, either forcing Peter away from the van or shooting him there on the spot. The prosecution's later theory was blunt. Peter was killed almost instantly. His body was moved, likely loaded into the Toyota, and taken to an unknown location. Joanne was restrained with cable ties, possibly with the intention of being abducted, but she fought back, escaped, and hid until help arrived. By daylight, police scoured the area. They found the combi pushed several meters off the road, the driver's seat pulled forward, a smear of blood and drag marks in the dirt. Nearby tire impressions matched the kind made by large off-road vehicles. And then came the detail that would change the whole case. The blood found at the scene and on Joanne's t-shirt was not just Peter's. It belonged to someone else, someone the forensic lab would soon identify. But before that match could be made, the investigation had to answer one burning question. Who in the middle of nowhere could commit a crime like this and vanish into the outback without a trace? For weeks, the case had nothing but a faceless suspect in a white Toyota. Then, a stroke of investigative luck, a roadhouse surveillance camera in the outback caught a tall, lanky man in a white four-wheel drive with a green canopy around the same time as the attack. His movements, his build, even his dog matched what Joanne Lees had described. The man was soon identified as Bradley John Murdoch, a long-haul truck driver and small-time drug trafficker who knew the Stuart Highway like the back of his hand. He had a reputation for carrying firearms and for being both methodical and unpredictable. When police learned he'd been in the area on the night of the attack, their attention locked on him. Still, knowing someone was in the area is one thing. Proving they were the attacker is another. That's when the science started speaking louder than the speculation. When forensic teams tested the evidence, three critical DNA matches emerged, and they became the backbone of the prosecution's case. First, the blood on the back of Joanne Lee's t-shirt. Forensic scientists testified it was at least 150 quadrillion times more likely to be Murdoch's than anyone else's. That number is so astronomically high, the odds of it belonging to another random person were virtually zero. Second, the cable ties used to restrain Joanne. Deep inside the adhesive loop, a spot that would be almost impossible to contaminate accidentally was DNA that matched Murdoch. Third, the gear stick of the combi van. Tests showed the genetic profile on it was 19,000 times more likely to be Murdoch's than anyone else's. Combined, these three pieces painted a picture. Whoever attacked the couple had physical contact with Joanne, the bindings, and the van, and the odds that it was anyone but Murdoch were microscopic. Of course, no big trial comes without a twist the defense can grab onto. During testing, one contamination incident was discovered. A full DNA profile belonging to a senior lab staff member was found on part of the evidence. Murdoch's defense team seized on this, arguing it called the entire forensic process into question. If contamination could happen once, they argued it could have happened again, maybe explaining Murdoch's DNA on the evidence. But prosecutors countered with a crucial point. The contaminated sample was separate from the incriminating DNA. The blood on Joanne's shirt and the DNA deep inside the cable tie adhesive were collected and tested under conditions that made accidental transfer highly unlikely. The jury would ultimately have to decide whether that one contamination event was enough to cast doubt on all three DNA matches or whether the science, even with one blemish, still told the real story. Through all the headlines and court dates, one voice remained constant: Joanne Lees. From the moment she escaped the scrub that night, she stuck to her story. She described the Toyota, the man's height and build, the way his dog sat in the front seat. The defense tried to paint her as unreliable. They pointed to the fact that she didn't speak to the media right away, that her demeanor seemed cold in interviews. But in court, she was steady. She identified Murdoch as the man who waved them down. She matched his appearance to the Roadhouse CCTV, and she never wavered under cross examination, even when the defense hammered her on tiny inconsistencies. It wasn't just her word, though. The CCTV image from the Outback Roadhouse showed a man with Murdoch's distinctive build and hair driving a vehicle that looked just like the one she described. And the timing? It slotted almost perfectly into the known movements that night. Bradley John Murdoch went on trial in Darwin in late 2005. The prosecution's case was simple but heavy. The DNA matches, the eyewitness ID, the CCTV footage, and Murdoch's presence in the area all pointed in one direction. The defense fired back with two main arguments. The DNA could have been contaminated, and Joanne Lees could have been mistaken or even lying. They floated an alternative theory that the couple had met Murdoch earlier that day at a roadside stop, leading to innocent DNA transfer. But the prosecution hit back. If the DNA came from an innocent meeting, how did it end up deep inside a tied cable tie and on the gear stick of their van? Jurors heard from forensic experts, police trackers, and even people who knew Murdoch. The picture that emerged was of a man who could plan, act fast, and disappear without a trace in the outback. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned its decision: guilty. Murdoch was convicted of murdering Peter Falconio, assaulting Joanne Lees, and kidnapping her. The sentence was life in prison, with a non-parole period of 28 years. Even as the judge read the sentence, Murdoch shook his head. He claimed he had nothing to do with Falconio's disappearance and that the system had got it wrong. The case didn't end there. Appeals would follow, TV specials would question the verdict, and the public would keep debating the missing body mystery. But officially, in the eyes of the law, Murdoch was the man who stopped that combi on the 14th of July 2001, and Peter Falconio never came home. From day one, this was the detail that kept the conspiracy fires burning. There was no body. In many people's minds, a murder case without a body is like a puzzle missing its central piece. Where was Peter Falconio? Why hadn't search teams, helicopters, cadaver dogs, or even private investigators been able to find a trace in over 2 decades? Police scoured vast stretches of the Northern Territory, focusing on areas where Murdoch could have driven after the attack. They brought in trackers, aerial sweeps, and ground searches, but the outback is unforgiving. It can swallow evidence, hold dust, heat, and time, erasing almost everything. The lack of a body became the defense's favorite weapon in court and the public's biggest doubt outside it. For many, the absence of Falconio's remains was proof enough that maybe, just maybe, the truth wasn't what the jury believed. Murdoch spent nearly 2 decades behind bars, maintaining the same line from the moment of his arrest. He didn't do it. He refused to participate in prison programs that required an admission of guilt, and he never hinted at where Falconio's body might be. Over the years, journalists, documentary crews, and even amateur sleuths tried to get him to talk. He gave interviews denying any role in the crime, calling the evidence flawed and the verdict a miscarriage of justice. In July of 2025, Murdoch died in prison at the age of 67 after a battle with cancer. Even on his deathbed, he offered no confession, no location, no parting truth for Falconio's family. Every big case leaves shadows, and this one's are long. For some, the DNA evidence is unshakable, three separate matches, all pointing at Murdoch. For others, the missing body and the contamination incident leave room for doubt. The Northern Territory Police still believe Murdoch was guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. Search experts say Falconio's remains could still be found buried deep, hidden well, perhaps in a spot only one man truly knew. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Unless someone else steps forward with information, the full story of that cold July night may never be known. And that's why, decades later, people are still arguing over whether justice was truly done, or if the real story is still out there, buried in the red dust of the outback. So here we are decades on, still staring down the same two paths. On one, the official story, a calculated ambush on the Stuart Highway, a murder, a body hidden so well it's never been found, and a mountain of DNA pointing straight at Bradley John Murdoch. On the other, the persistent whispers, flawed forensics, a contaminated lab, a survivor some didn't trust, and the nagging possibility that the real killer walked free. If you believe the science, this case is closed. If you believe the doubts, it's one of Australia's greatest miscarriages of justice. And that's why this story has never faded, because both sides have something the other can't easily erase. Peter Falconio's family still waits for a grave to visit. Joanne Lees still lives with the memory of that night, and Murdoch's final act was to take whatever he knew to the grave. So now it's your turn. Look at the facts, weigh the evidence, and tell me, did the jury get it right, or has the Outback been keeping a darker secret all along? Let's strip away the noise, the theories, the media spin, the what ifs. What's left are the cold facts tested in court. Three separate pieces of DNA evidence matched Bradley John Murdoch, not one three. The blood on Joanne Lee's shirt was astronomically more likely to be his than anyone else's. The gear stick of the combi had his DNA. The inner adhesive of the cable ties, a place you can't touch without being part of the act, had his DNA. Add to that the Roadhouse CCTV showing a man of his exact build with his exact vehicle in the right place at the right time. Add Joanne Lee's unwavering identification. Add the fact that Murdoch was in the area that night and lied about his movements. Yes, there was a contamination incident in the lab, and yes, the missing body gives doubters something to cling to. But those don't erase three independent DNA matches that were collected and tested under different conditions. If we're honest, the evidence isn't just strong, it's overwhelming. Could the system have made a mistake? In theory, yes. But is there a plausible alternate suspect whose movements, appearance, and DNA line up in exactly the same way? No. That's why the jury convicted, why the appeals failed, and why, for all the chatter about doubt, the case still stands. So the answer? Based on the evidence we have, he's guilty, and unless some game changing new proof comes to light, that's not likely to change.